if you hired me to run your family office, I would probably focus a lot on fees. Oftentimes, clients don't see what they pay, which makes it difficult for everybody. And so the client's bearing that expense from their investment return, always. The smartest family offices and the smartest investors out there always do that. They don't take anything for granted. And by the way, those institutions work with those people. So they're used to people asking the tough questions. They're used to people pushing back, but it's uncomfortable pushing back on someone you trust.
Hi, Raymond. It's so great to have you today.
Katya, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. Well, shall we start with the introduction?
Sure. So thanks for having me. My name's Raymond Dinunzio. I live in Houston, Texas, and work for a company that we started about 4.5 years ago called TOS Advisors. Our main mission at TOS is to really provide family office infrastructure as a service. Most of my career was spent at firms like UBS. I spent almost 2 decades there, oversaw their private wealth management division and family office division for almost 2 decades for the Western half footprint of the United States and parts of North America. And retired from there in 2016. Didn't know what else to do, but with an experienced footprint in family offices, and I was approached by some friends of ours that were in a large single family offices. We started an organization to help other family offices try and optimize workflows and automate the operations of a family office.
Fabulous. That would be so interesting and useful to know how is fees management covered at the MFOs and the SFOs in North America. And based on your experience, how critical is this topic?
And in the single family office world, depending on who you have run your family office, the character of the family office is going to really follow who you hire. So if your first person that runs the family office is a trust lawyer, she will focus on making sure everything's in good order and everything's tight in that regard. If you hire a deal attorney, he may focus on looking at lots of different investments in sort of direct investments. If you hire a tax person, they're going to focus on bookkeeping and things in that regard. If you hired me to run your family office, I would probably focus a lot on fees, because that was one of the things that I recognized when I worked at UBS, is that there's a lot of disparity around the world with what different people pay in fees at different institutions. And it's really one of those things where the squeaky wheel really does get the grease. In the multifamily office world, it also is really broad. So on one end of the family office world, what you have are an MFO that doesn't do any investment management, and they do bookkeeping and tax and act as more of your CFO on behalf of the family. In fact, for them, I'd say that for sure they think they are a fiduciary, as do most RIAs, but they don't want to cross over and get into the investment advice. For them, they think that's a conflict of interest, right? And so what they try and do really well is look after your financials like it's theirs, try and take a look at expenses, monitor what you're doing on a budget standpoint, and they do that quite well. And there's a lot of great technology that helps them do that better today. In the MFO world that looks more like a registered investment advisory firm, I think they try and do a good job nowadays. I think they try and isolate fees as best they can. And I think that they're certainly transparent on where they charge fees for their client, right? That's almost a given in today's world, because that gets isolated out from everything else that the client pays. But the problem with the rest of the system that they have to embrace is the lack of transparency around that system. So when they're doing investment vehicles like private equity or alternative investments, or when they're paying account level fees, or when they're using loan products, when they're using things like structured products, it's often really difficult to figure out what goes on inside the fee composition. If you even tried at an RIA to build a spreadsheet out and try and monitor all the different fees that you're.
So what value could proper fees management and monitoring bring to your North American clients and families?
Yeah, you're starting to see some noise in that, and you're starting to see some attention to that. And the larger and more vibrant family offices have been paying attention to this all along. Work with a really good friend of ours in New York who oversees a large family office for a Canadian family. Kevin grew up in the investment management worlds, and so he focuses on that quite extensively. The reality is, it's kind of like what John Bogle said at Vanguard: what you don't pay to somebody else, you keep. We did an analysis for a prospective client on what they were spending with all their different investment managers and custodian banks and other relationships around. And a unique characteristic of the industry, Katya, is that the longer you've been a client to most institutions, right, the more fatigued and tired your pricing is. Let me give you an example. If you and I sold a company today and we're brother and sister and we got $500 million. And so each of us split $250 million. And we decided to go speak to a lot of different firms and talk with them about what their pricing would be to do us. You and I are probably going to get shown a fee that's 20 to 25% less today, the stated fee, than someone that may have sold their business for $1 billion 10 years ago. And think about that. The person who sold their business for $1 billion 10 years ago, their money's probably grown to $1.5 billion or maybe more, depending on how they're allocated. And yet their fees are higher than what the firm is willing to offer to somebody new today. And so that's problematic. And there's no real way for a client easily to understand what they should be paying. But you really have to have some really good data points and some understanding of what someone just as you would be paying in the market today. So it's difficult, but everything's additive. When we analyze something for a prospective client of ours, and we said, look, you could probably renegotiate all your relationships with your current providers. You wouldn't have to change. In the old days, if you wanted better pricing, that meant you went from firm A to firm B, and they offered you better pricing and you moved, and then you had to experience all those frictional costs and tax effects from doing that. And in a modern environment, if you have the ability to understand where pricing should be, it's been our experience that negotiating with those institutions, it's much better for them to keep you as a client and lower your fee to something that's more modern than it is to lose you as a client, right? And so there's a lot of difficulty in understanding that as a client in the marketplace, but certainly everything in that regard drops to the bottom line. And the prospective client that we looked at had a net worth of about $580 million, and about $270 million of that was in sort of your traditional investment management at the traditional investment management firms. Our estimation was that he was probably paying $2 million a year in fees more than he should have been paying. There's also, everybody focuses on return all the time, which makes sense, right? And so we focus on that, and there's less attention to fees and expenses. There seems to be attention to it when you make a decision to move to a provider. Even though you don't have full transparency, you'll get a proposal and it'll tell you what the firm charges you for, what's an explicit charge that they can show you, right? But that's not all the charge in all the fees that you're paying. And then in most of the time moving forward, the attention to detail is on performance. And understand that fees matter. What you don't earn this year compounds. So if you saved $100,000 this year, and every year on your fees, that's going to compound. And if the market grew by 10%, you have $110,000 working for you next year.
When would you advise to start managing fees? At which stage?
Yeah, I think you need to do it all the time, right? This is sort of like, it's when you buy, but it's always with maintenance too, with many things. So in the beginning, when you engage in a relationship, for certain, if you're looking at multiple different institutions, or you're looking at a specific institution for something, could be a private equity investment, it could be a direct investment, it could be a real estate investment. You want to compare and contrast how that looks and how it looks differently than others in the market. And the same when you're hiring a bank or a financial advisor or a wealth management firm or an institution. Really work hard to understand everything that's going on and where all the fees are. The best advisors know this. The best advisors invest the same way that their clients do. They'll show the client their statements. The way I invest for you is the way I invest for me, right? And so it's in their best interest to know these things. But again, it's quite difficult. And then over time, you want to make certain that you're still paying attention. Certain behaviors can happen over time. Once trust is reached with an institution and a team, you've made oftentimes a very big emotional decision, Katya, you've worked with your family all your life to build this business. You've created a huge amount of money, and you need to feel comfortable about the decision that you're making. And you need to make sure that someone's interest is aligned with you moving forward. And once you do that, there's a sense of relief, I think, for a lot of people. They've made the tough decision, they've picked a firm or two, and they're working down this path. But you really still need to be paying attention. There's a lot of reasons why. Oftentimes, it's driven by objectives of an institution, that you might be working with a banker, and the banker has KPIs of how they get paid every year. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to really understand why they're making choices and selections for you, and understand the economics of what they do and everything they do. And you also want to understand when you need a new service from an institution that you're still paying attention again. Don't just accept it as a standard that if you do business with bank ABC and you have hundreds of millions of dollars there, and you're working on something and you need to do some foreign exchange component to a transaction that you're working with. You might be buying a lovely property in Aspen for $50 million and you live in Switzerland. Well, there's other costs of things that are going to happen to you throughout that transaction. Foreign exchange, your new loan rates, how things are working. And so it's easy to trust your institution and just go with them for pricing. It's smarter to understand the different components that make up that transaction and think about how you can make sure you're getting treated the best way possible. The smartest family offices and the smartest investors out there always do that. They don't take anything for granted. And by the way, those institutions work with those people. So they're used to people asking the tough questions. They're used to people pushing back, but it's uncomfortable pushing back on someone you trust. Right? I mean, that's tricky. So having the information and knowing a suggestion, and when someone presents something to you, in Katya, you could say, I see this fee on here. Do I have to pay that fee? Does that fee ever get waived for anybody? There's nice ways to ask the question. And then there's the tough ways that some clients just present it to people. I'll never pay a fee like that. And if that's the way it is with you, then we're leaving your institution.
Yeah, the way of presentation matters a lot.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Well,
so why don't family offices get better over time in monitoring these fees? What is the bottleneck here?
Oh my gosh, there's so many bottlenecks. And you know, with the right information at your fingertips, you can actually just be a little bit of a velvet hammer and just say, wow, it really looks like we're paying more than we should for this. And just a conversation like that alone will have people go to work a little bit harder for you to reduce things in different areas. You know, I think the bottleneck is it's got so many lanes in it. It's like, this is like a super highway, and you're not going to believe this, but here in Houston, there's an interstate called I-10 that runs east and west. And at one point, I think it's the widest highway in the country. At one point, it's 22 lanes. And in the afternoon at rush hour, it's nothing but a parking lot, right? And if you think about all the different ways fees make it to a client, it's really in all those different lanes. And so it's hard to peel back. It's hard to understand all the different things that you should look for and that you should look at and that are examinable, right? That there are data points and you can examine them, but you have to know where to look, right? The easiest way is to say, oh, what's my advisory fee? And people think when they look at that advisory fee, that's everything that they're paying. And it's just, it's such a nominal component to everything that goes on for the client, right? So there's a lot of work to do. That's why we like your company. We think you're doing some really cool stuff. We've enjoyed engaging with you and thinking about the product and thinking about the way that the U.S. consumer can embrace these things. There's certainly a desire and a hunger for it.